Hi. Hi, everybody. I'm Janet Jackim. I'm with Sachs Tierney in Scottsdale. And I want to talk about M&A transactions, but they're mostly going to be business sales, business purchases and sales. About a year ago, we were all having just a blast doing these transactions. But then certain things happened in the marketplace. The Canadian stock exchange imploded relative to marijuana stocks. There were signs of overgrowth in the, especially with respect to the majors like MedMen, Curaleaf, Harvest, and suddenly M&A work started to slow down. We're seeing it pick up again, but I think with limited circumstances. The best of the dispensary cartels, the dispensary groups, are still doing well, and they're still acquiring. So we're going to talk today about the type of business transaction that actually results in a cannabis license being moved. I know from my history, if I go to a club or I go to a restaurant or a party, people are talking about cannabis. And they'll oftentimes say to me, "Oh, geez, I really want to get into that." And they will tell me that they have some money, maybe they inherited, they are business people who have done well, and they've decided now's the time to get in. So we're going to talk about how you can respond to those kinds of inquiries. How do I get into this business? Slide, please. Thank you.
Trying to change the slide? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Just touch the arrow button, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I can do that too. So
Yeah.
I see it here. Thank you, Tom. Okay. In a cannabis M&A, we are only dealing with purchase of control of the dispensary license. We are talking about asset acquisitions, corporate stock purchases, membership interest purchases of LLCs. We are not talking about the purchase of the dispensary license. We are not talking about the purchase of a board position or an officer position, because those kinds of transactions are prohibited by law. So the AMMA does not permit the license to be transferred from the dispensary owner, the license holder, to anyone else. So how do we do this? How do we change ownership, if you will? This is a schematic as to how the typical dispensary is owned in Arizona. And this is specific to Arizona, please, because each state's law on cannabis is very different. The dispensary has to be a nonprofit organization. It can be an LLC. I've even seen one partnership, and it typically is a corp, a nonprofit corporation. It is the holder of the license. Typically, the dispensary entity will have a board of directors as well as officers. And who becomes the board of directors? Typically, early on in the AMMA's history, the board of directors were the founders. And they are also the people who typically populate the rest of these other entities. So if you're dealing with a nonprofit, what does that mean? There's no profits to distribute. And of course, the law requires that if there are profits, they're to be used for the business of the nonprofit as well as other nonprofit type activities. How, if you're doing a dispensary, or you're running a dispensary, and the dispensary has revenues of $15 to $30 million a year, what does the dispensary do with all of that money? Well, typically, the board of directors of the dispensary will have formed affiliated entities who will be paid a mighty sum, typically, from the revenues of the dispensary. So, for example, in the typical arrangement, there will be a cultivation manager who is managing the cultivation facility. There will also be a dispensary manager who is managing the day-to-day affairs of the dispensary. There may be a real estate owner, LLC, and personal property such as intellectual property will reside in another LLC, and so forth. And each one of them is under contract with the dispensary. The contracts will typically pay a substantial sum of money from the nonprofit dispensary to the other affiliated entities, assuming, of course, that the affiliated entities are doing their job. They're performing services like hiring and firing for the dispensary, other contracts that the dispensary may need, production contracts, cultivation contracts, and so forth. This does not result in a transfer of the certificate holder's license. When the board of directors is tired, which is what we've seen today in today's environment, because many of these board members were involved early on in the AMMA, like 2010. Maybe one of them has died. Perhaps others now want to retire and take some money out of the regime that I just showed you. Or there's a major cannabis organization from across the country who wants a dispensary in Arizona, wants to open up and have a presence here. Well, this is the regime that we go through in order to transfer control of the dispensary to someone else. The seller in a business transaction involving the license is not the dispensary. The seller is an affiliate. So if we go back, the seller could very well be the dispensary manager. This is an LLC. Typically, the members of the LLC will be on the board of the nonprofit. And so there is typically as I mentioned, there's a contract between the dispensary manager and the dispensary. So we can sell that contract. We can assign that management contract to a new player. Or the new player can come in and buy the membership interests of the dispensary manager. When we actually close the transaction, the current board will resign and the new board of the acquiring company will step in to manage, control the dispensary, as well as manage and control the dispensary manager. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. This is a really complex series of transactions within the M&A. And there are so many levels of people involved or entities involved. Like, for example, of course, there's the buyer and the buyer's principles and the dispensary itself and the dispensary's principals, which are agents, which are the officers and the board members. There are managers, as we see from the chart. There's a cultivator, a number of cultivator principals. There are landlords and vendors, and there are other stakeholders such as the lenders of any of the entities involved. What we see in Arizona in M&As, and I've done about a dozen of them now, these are typically not Fortune 500 companies either coming in or the dispensary and dispensary regime itself. Typically, buyers and sellers in this place are junkies, opportunity junkies. And you know, we're opportunity junkie too, right? Yeah. So these are people who are entrepreneurial based, looking for expansion, and the sellers have a variety of reasons why they want to move on. Typically as well in these deals, the due diligence is terrible, very difficult to handle. Books and records are shit. Oh, pardon my French, but they're typically really in poor condition and oftentimes not existing. Typically as well, the dispensary and its regime of other entities doesn't have counsel or doesn't have regular counsel. And so there might be litigation pending or litigation to soon ensue. There may be partners who are in the shadows whose positions are not quite clear. So lots of what I call hair.
Mm-hmm.
Question.
Yes.
So I don't know anything about corporate law, so I may not be able to get this out right. But so if you can't have if there's not the direct sales agreement between the dispensary and the purchaser, but the purchaser can work the edges of the dispensary, is there some way to have an agreement with the dispensary that the dispensary will do what you said, what you
Yes.
talked about? And is that okay to have that kind
Yes,
of?
and
what
I
is that?
always include that because the dispensary is going to do some activities as part of the closing.
So it's not a sales agreement, but it's some kind of a, what would
It is, yeah, they're sales agreements.
But the dispensary can't sell.
No, but it's not. It's just agreeing to certain,
Uh,
it's agreeing to certain related activities.
Okay.
Well, Janet had pointed out also that they changed the directors. They keep the same entity, but the new directors
Maybe
come
that's
in.
what she's talking about.
And the new directors are your people, or the buyer's people.
How do you make sure that happens?
The old director.
That's the deal you make. Exactly, that's the deal you
Yeah,
make.
the old directors will, they will add, because remember, they have to go to DHS to sign up the new principals. So the old directors will add the new directors and simultaneously resign.
So what's the, what can?
They want to get paid.
How do you compare, if let's say you do the transaction, but the old directors go, you know what, we changed our mind.
Oh, I always have all of the directors, all of the officers, all key employees sign the agreement.
I've had cases where the old directors will not resign.
Right.
What Tom brought up, which
Oh, well,
generates
then I guess you
litigation.
go into court.
Right.
And you
Yes.
probably,
But
and
that's-
and your deal probably doesn't close.
That's
Right,
what
So-
you don't pay them until you get control.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is the agreement? I mean, if they,
Escrow, probably escrow, right? You have
I
money in
escrow,
and
I
then you-
always escrow. There aren't very many escrow companies that will do these deals. There are some, but I always escrow money. And I might even close the transaction, but hold back certain amounts to make sure that these various conditions precedent are met. And each deal is different, so.
Have you ever been?
The escrow agent for one of these? Your
Have I
firm?
ever been?
Your trust
No,
account, your firm?
no.
Would you do it?
No, you don't want to
Well,
be.
if you're not
You-
involved, I mean, you're like a third party.
No, Absolutely not. I'm not touching any of that money.
In your IOLTA account or something?
Oh,
No,
God.
no, and I'll tell you, I do transactions outside of the state, and I will often see a sole practitioner act as escrow agent, and that person is also the attorney for one of the buying
Very
or selling
risky.
parties.
No conflict there.
No.
Very risky.
And we're like, no, we're not doing it that way. We're going through an independent escrow officer.
Oh, and Janet, we have a question from online. It says typically an LLC does not have a board of directors like a corporation entity would. Because an LLC can be the nonprofit, does there need to be a similar board set up akin to a corporation?
I'm not sure I heard all of it, but the key is that if the dispensary is an LLC, it will have, typically in these cases, it will have officers, and it will have members, of course, member owners, and they will all sign, and they are also all registered with DHS. So they are principals of the dispensary, and again, they will resign their employment, their officer, their agent, all positions in favor of the new group. I have included in the materials more detailed information concerning the differences between a typical and a cannabis M&A. And you know, if you get into this world, you'll want to take a look at that more carefully. What I find interesting is that after a short 5-6 months of more quiet periods, not M&A activity happening across the country, we're back on again. And I don't know why exactly, except that that slowdown may have been a period when many of the companies were re-examining their strategies. I've seen a number of large transactions not happen, or I've seen the sales price halving. In other words, sales prices are being reconfigured, reconsidered because they were too high. A typical dispensary in Arizona now goes for about 15 to 30 million, and it is, and that may or may not actually be related to EBITDA or any other financial aspect. It's there are, as I said, opportunity junkies here who and from out of state who just want to get in. And they want a piece of the action, and they're willing to pay on the hope that recreational will soon come. So if you want to do, this is the typical versus cannabis M&A chart. If you want to work on buying, selling a dispensary, please make sure you've done your homework. This is a very complex business transaction. You can certainly call me, email me. I do try to network within our bar, and we Cannabis Bar Association members are very helpful. So don't hesitate to call and check on with us, and we'll make sure we get back to you. That's it.
Oh, can I make a quick comment?
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Tom was there in the beginning also. Those of us who were there in the beginning, we kind of knew how they did it in California with the management companies and the nonprofits. But we pulled a lot of this stuff out of, let's say, our hats. And
Yeah.
I both appreciate and you have my sympathy that you're cleaning up these messes we made all those years ago.
Yes. No, it's good. It's good.
You're having a strange location.